Mary was a girl who lived in England. Her mother had died, so it was only her and her dad. Her dad's job was to look after a lighthouse along the coast. At night he would light the lamps to help keep ships away from the dangerous rocks. If the lighthouse was not lit, the ships could crash on the rocks and get shipwrecked. There was a causeway in between the land and the lighthouse. A causeway is a path over the rocks and sand. Most of the time the causeway was underwater. The causeway could only be used when the tide was out. One afternoon Mary was alone in the lighthouse. Her dad had needed to buy some food, so he crossed the causeway and went to the shops. He planned to be home before the tide came in and the causeway would be covered in water. It was going to be a stormy night and it was getting dark. The waves were crashing against the rocks. Mary's dad had told her not to be afraid because he would be back soon. But there were some evil men hiding behind the rocks who saw her dad leave. They knew that Mary was alone in the lighthouse, and they also knew that there was a ship passing by that night which was filled with expensive goods. These men were called wreckers. If there was a shipwreck, they would rush down to the beach, not to help the drowning sailors, but to steal all the things from the ship. They were happy when there was a shipwreck. How horrible to be so greedy and cruel. So they planned to capture Mary's father on his way home to keep him from lighting the lamps. When he returned with his basket of food, they rushed out of their hiding place and grabbed him. They tied his hands and feet and threw him into a shed, leaving 2 men as guards. He shouted for them to let him go, but they just laughed at him. The poor dad cried as he thought of little Mary all alone in the big lighthouse. "Oh, Mary, what will you do? There's no one to light the lamps, and ships could wreck on the rocks, and lives will be lost." Meanwhile, Mary was watching out the window, waiting for her dad to come back. When the clock said 6 o'clock, she knew that the water would soon be over the causeway. An hour later, Mary looked again towards the beach, but her dad still wasn't coming. At 8 o'clock, the causeway was nearly completely covered with water. Poor Mary was getting very worried. "Oh, Father, hurry up! Why aren't you here? Have you forgotten about me?" But there was no answer, only the noise of the waves crashing and the wind howling. Surely there would be no lights in the lighthouse that night. But Mary remembered what her mum used to say. We should always pray when we're in trouble. Quickly Mary knelt and prayed for God to help her. "Oh Lord, please help me and show me what to do, and please be with Daddy and help him to come home safely." The water was now fully over the causeway. It was dark and scary. Although Mary was alone, she wasn't really alone. God was watching over her. The wreckers were gleefully walking along the beach, waiting for the ship. They hoped that because it was so dark, the sailors would think that they were far out at sea. But Mary decided that she would try to light the lamps. But the lamps were way too high. She didn't give up easily, though. She got some matches and a stepladder and tried to reach them. But it was still too high, so she got a little table and put the ladder on top. No good, she still couldn't reach. She thought, if only I had a stick, I could tie a match onto it and then I could reach the wicks. But there were no sticks to be found. The storm was raging wildly. The sailors on board the ship were looking for the lighthouse, but they couldn't see any lights. Where were they? Were they lost? They didn't know which way to steer. Mary's daddy was praying hard that God would look after his little girl in the dark and lonely lighthouse. Poor Mary was scared and lonely. She nearly gave up, but then she thought of the big old Bible down in the room below. Maybe she could reach if she stepped on it. But how could she stand on the Bible? It was God's holy word that her mother had loved reading. "But this is an emergency," exclaimed Mary. "I'm sure if Mum was here she would let me take it." She quickly found the big book and placed it on top of the table under the ladder and tried once more to reach the lamps. She was just high enough. She touched each wick with the match until the light was shining brightly across the dark night. Her father, tied up in the shed, saw the light. He thanked God for helping Mary. The sailors saw the light and steered their ship safely away from the rocks. The wreckers also saw the light and were surprised and very angry. All All night the light shone brightly, and in the morning Mary's dad escaped from the shed. When he reached the lighthouse, Mary told him all that had happened. Mary was very brave. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you should do even when you are scared. Mary could have sat down and cried, but she didn't. She prayed to God and God helped her. She also didn't give up easily. She kept on trying because she knew it was very important. You can be brave like Mary. When you are scared or don't know what to do, ask God to help you. He is just as willing to help you as he helped Mary. He might give you an idea of what to do, or maybe he'll send someone to help you. With God, you are never really alone. Be brave and trust in him.